Hello everyone, welcome back to Exploration Arcanum. My name is Jason. My guest today is Satyros Phil Brucato, lead developer of the iconic role-playing game Mage the Ascension. Mage is very special to me because it helped develop my views on magic and the occult as a teenager in the 1990s, more than any other book or game. With its rich lore and diverse views on the nature of magic, Mage continues to hold a special place in my heart to this day. In this episode, Brucato discusses the spiritual and metaphysical influences that shaped the game. He reflects on the development process, the philosophical underpinnings of the game's factions, and the evolution of the game's narrative over the years, emphasizing the importance of understanding the motivations behind each faction and the complexities of power dynamics within the game. Brucato also discusses the complexities of power, magic, and the portrayal of evil in role-playing games. He emphasizes the importance of understanding malign magic and its consequences, the need for realistic antagonists, and the recognition of our potential for evil. He also addresses cultural representation in gaming and reflects on the evolution of the gaming industry, highlighting the accessibility of new games and the importance of research in game design. I want to thank Satyros for coming on the show. I'll put links to his social media and where you can find Mage the Ascension in the description below. If you enjoy this episode, please give it a like and subscribe for more esoteric conversations. Thank you.
Casting circles beneath the midnight sky, incantations beneath the shadows fly, summon a secret.
Well, you know what? This is an honor.
Oh,
And I have to say that because your work has literally changed my life.
oh, thank you.
And I don't say that lightly. I want to thank you for taking this time to come speak to me about it. As you know, I spoke to Jason Louv a few months back. We kind of nerded out about White Wolf and Mage and Vampire. So to start us off, tell us a little bit about the background behind Mage the Ascension, and how did your experiences in your life influence the game?
Oh boy, that's a big. Okay, so the short version of the extraordinarily long answer to that. I have been interested in spirituality and metaphysics since I was a kid. Had a brief and unfortunate but formative experience with born-again Christianity in my mid-teens, which led me going, well, I know there's something to this whole, beyond the physical world thing, but it's not that. And that led me, I'd always been interested in magic and so forth. And so, and magic and religion. And so I started investigating and, looking into various different spiritual paths, religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, and so forth. And I would read about them and read the scriptures, then go, huh. And finally, I think it's my late teens, maybe early 20s, when I was in college at some point, I kind of had a sit down with with divinity and basically said, what the hell, dude? I can tell there's something more here, but everything I check out eventually comes up bullshit. What do I do with this? And by that point, I'd had some metaphysical experiences. So I was like, I know there's more to it than this. And the answer I get back was almost exactly in my head was, that's because you're looking for God in the words of man, and the words of man are flawed. If you seek divinity, or if you seek God, is the answer I got, but I prefer the term divinity because it's non-gendered. But if you seek God in the creations of God, not the creations of man. That led me to paganism, and I've been pagan, and I've been formally pagan since my late teens. I think that spiritual path was always part of me, but in any case, and that's pagan in a non-denominational sense. I'm not Wiccan, very, very not Wiccan. I'm no more Wiccan than I am Southern Baptist. But for me, the revelation of something deeper and something greater comes from experiencing and observing the natural world, which is, ironic given that we're practicing magic on through technology at the moment. But that's a whole other story.
Well,
So in any case,
we'll talk about that in a minute because I have some questions for you about that. Go on,
Sure.
please. Go on, please.
So I started writing the writing journey. That's a whole other, we could spend like a whole hour on that. But the writing journey basically came down to me starting a career as a professional writer in 1989 as a movie critic, actually, for a local paper. But by 1990, I'd begun selling fiction as well as nonfiction. And back about 10 years earlier, when I went to college with Bill Bridges, John Bridges, Daniel Greenberg, Les Brooks, and Sam Shirley from, Les and Sam from Chaosium. And we kind of had this weird little metaphysical batshit group in college. And we were also part of the Games Masters, which was the college gaming group. In Games Masters, we talked a lot about different things that you could do with role-playing games as a subversive art form, as opposed to kill orcs, get treasure, go up levels. And by the early 90s, Andrew Greenberg, Dan's and John's younger brother, was involved, and Daniel was involved with that fusion of Lion Rampant and White Wolf magazine that resulted in White Wolf Game Studio in 1990/1991. Andrew was involved in creating Vampire the Masquerade, which obviously came out in 1991. And when he needed freelancers, he called Bill. So Bill started freelancing for them in 1990, late 91, early 92. Bill and I had been roommates in college. And so Bill gets the Werewolf developer job the following year. And I'm like, by that point, I've been professionally writing for several years. I'm like, professional writer, hire me. So he did. And the following year after that, after an epic thing, which is another story, we can stick a pin in that, maybe come back to it later. But in the course of that epic story, I end up applying for and then, getting the Mage developer position in 1993. Meanwhile, Stuart Wick, who was an absolute fucking visionary genius, when Stuart and his brother Steve and Mark Reinhagen were working on the cosmology for the World of Darkness, and Stuart is the guy behind like the Book of Nod. He didn't write it, but the whole idea of Cain and the antediluvians and stuff like that, that's Stuart. Stuart was much more metaphysically inclined than Mark. And so when Vampire was a hit and they said, let's follow this up, we'll have the 5 World of Darkness lines. Mark wants to do Werewolf and they're going to do Ghost and Fairy, but Stuart says, I want Mage, because Stuart was very influenced by the philosopher Robert Pirsig, and particularly his books Lila and Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And what Stuart wanted to do was he wanted to present mages as agents of reality. And what he did that was groundbreaking in terms of role-playing games was that rather than a mage being some guy throwing combat spells around, combat maneuvers dressed up in magic drag, he came up with the idea of magic as an extension of the mage. His original draft was ambitious, but not. I don't want to. Yeah, okay, it was not complete. So they tore it down to the foundations, rewrote it in a few weeks, and because they had to release it at Gen Con, it was already set up for a Gen Con release. But they stripped it down and rebuilt it by committee, including Bill and Andrew and Travis Williams and Brian Campbell and Kathleen Ryan, who become much more important later, and Sam Chubb, who was important the whole time. But they stripped it all down to the foundations and put it together, put it into editing and sent it to me. I had already been tapped to write a book on the Technocracy, but I had no idea what I was writing. Let me silence my phone here. I had no idea what I was supposed to be writing because we didn't have, Mage wasn't finished. So as soon as they got it, yes, I know. As soon as they got it finished, they sent it to me. And they said, well, what do you like about it? What do you not like about it? What would you do with it if you were in charge of Mage? And I sent them like a 20-something page prospectus of this, and this. And I got the job. Upon getting the job, Ken Cliff, the head of editing and development, hands me when I get to the office, hands me the first copy of Mage to arrive from the printer. The rest of the copies had gone straight from the printer to Gen Con because it needed to be released like a few days later. And he says, here. And I was like, so how much creative freedom do I have with this? He says, as long as you don't make any major changes right off the bat, it's all yours. We don't have the slightest idea what to do with it. So I did. And I talked a lot, with Stuart about what his original intentions were. I talked with the other people and brought most of the people who worked on that together. And I also had to talk Steve Brown, the editor, or rather author of the first Mage supplement, out of quitting because he was in the same situation I was. He was told he had a book to write. He had a deadline to write it and no idea what he was writing about because Mage wasn't finished yet. So I get on the phone, talk to Steve Brown. We hash out what we're going to do. We divide it up, and that's the Book of Chantries. And then we go to Gen Con. We sell the shit out of it at Gen Con, and then I talk to people who are buying it and talk to people who worked on it and go, okay, what do you want from this? What do you see from this? How do you envision this? And then I start start reading the reviews, and the reviews start coming back. And some of them are, wow, this is neat. And some of them are like, what the fuck is this even? And part of the what the fuck is this even is that the rules don't work.
Wow.
And part of it is there's a lot of concepts flying around here, but nobody understands what they're supposed to mean. So I spend the next year or so hammering on the rules. I get together the collaboration team, which is basically the core design team for Mage going forward from that point, which is Kathleen Ryan, Brian Campbell, Sam Chop, Judith McLaughlin, Travis Williams, Bill Bridges, a bit of input from Jim Moore, and Owl going back, who it turns out is unfortunately a Pretendian, but that's a whole other story there. And I just kind of get in there and go, okay. Stuart sees the mages as agents of dynamism, which moves the world forward, or stasis, which locks it into place. And I see them also as agents of entropy, in the case of the Nefandi, drawing things back unless things keep going forward. Stuart's metaphysical philosophies, combined with my metaphysical experiences and practices and beliefs, combined by way of, in my case, my major inspirations for that were Harlan Ellison, Starhawk, and Joseph Campbell originally. These things changed as time went on, but that's another story as well. But I turned it because one of the big criticisms that Mage first received was a whole lot of flighty paradigm things here, but nobody's got anything to hold on to. My background is also in acting. I was an actor for 10 years. That's what I studied in school, in both high school and college. And I brought my method acting background into Mage, and I said, okay, well, one of the things that's going to that will, one of the ways that will give people something to hold on to by making it personal.
Mm.
It goes from dynamism, stasis, paradigm to you have the power of a god. What are you going to do with it, and what is it going to do to you?
Right.
By year 3, Mage is a bestseller and has won a bunch of awards. And so that's the short version. Um, Eventually, we burned ourselves out because we were producing ludicrous amount of material in a ludicrously short period of time. We all drove each other and ourselves crazy. I jumped ship / got pushed. It was a mutual thing in 1999, 1998, 1999. And for a while distanced myself from Mage, put together a studio that produced Deliria fairy tales for a new millennium. And in the meantime, because of the combination of my divorce from White Wolf and my divorce from my from my wife, who I was involved with during White Wolf days, I just basically went on a vision quest. I moved to San Francisco, and I got involved with the ecstatic dance community. I got involved with an Inanna priestess, Francesca, and did a bunch of the things that I had just got involved with the Burning Man community, and started doing more experience and less theory. And so when I came back to Mage, because we gradually, the various people who had gotten on each other's nerves, me included, rebuilt our bridges to each other by 2011. So by 2012, I came back to Mage. I was bringing a bunch more experience and a bunch more knowledge than I'd had back in the 90s, as well as a number of tools and a lot of communities that I hadn't had access to back in the 90s when we were doing it. So part of the Mage 20 journey was bringing Mage forward 20 years. And part of it was fixing a lot of the shit that we got wrong the first time.
Right.
And making it as I said when Richard Thomas and I were talking about it, making it a Mage for all Mage fans and a Mage for now, not nostalgia.
Now, it's funny that as you're talking, the things you're relating, I'm seeing the Mage part, right? So for people watching, I'm going to give you a crash course in the traditions and the technocracy. Okay. So you have the traditions of 9. You have the 9 mystic traditions. And actually, you could say more if you want to include the different crafts, like the hollow ones.
Yeah.
The ecstatic that Zeta was just mentioning would be the cult of ecstasy, which are originally they were kind of like hippie mages, but the more the game progressed, you saw exactly what it was. They were more like shamans. But then at the same time, you have the dream speakers, who are actual shamans, and then
that's one of the things we got wrong. Was there's no such thing as Native American shamanism, and of course, they're not all Indigenous Americans,
right?
But that's one of the terminology changed a lot between the early 90s and now.
Right, and that's actually something I'm glad you brought up, because I noticed that pre-95 White Wolf and post-95 White Wolf had very distinct, like, okay, well, these type of people belong to this, and these type of people belong to that, right? And that started, like you said, when you did Mage 20th anniversary, you brought it into more modern and correct phrasings. But like for me, because I started Vampire was my first game, and what led me to Mage was through the Tremere, who were human mages who became vampires. Well, I wanted to know why a human mage would want to do that. And that led me into Mage the Ascension, and how they were like an offshoot of the Order of Hermes, which is basically ceremonial magicians. Right. And it just kind of evolved from there. When you were talking earlier about the science, the magic that we're doing right now, talking like this, that led me to think about the Technocracy, who originally appeared like the bad guys. They were the enemy. But as the game progressed, it started to be like, well, no, they're not the enemy. They just have a different opinion. And a lot of people, even when I was talking to Jason about it, a lot of people are like, well, maybe the Technocracy is right. You don't want a bunch of random people throwing reality around, But how did that transition start to come about with the viewpoint of each faction?
Well, originally, and yeah, well, I'll get back to that part in a minute, but originally, it was just simply because Mage needed an enemy. In the original draft that Stuart and Steve did before it was stripped down, the Technocracy was mentioned but never described. They were just like they were the big bad, and that was Stuart's idea was that they were the embodiments of stasis, where mages were trying to move the world forward, the Technocracy was trying to lock it into place, but they weren't described in any way. And one of the criticisms that the folks in-house had of that draft was you have an antagonist, but no way to work them into the game. So when they stripped it down, they threw in the 5 conventions, which were not in the original draft. They threw in the five conventions, threw in stuff like the Men in Black, and then said they're the bad guys. They're evil. We don't know how. We don't know how they work. We don't know how any of this fits together historically, but they're the bad guys because they locked the world into place and killed Magick. And I was just like, none of this actually works.
Sure.
When you look at things historically, because again, this was written together, written by a bunch of kids. I mean, we were all in our 20s. When I joined the staff in 93, I was the 3rd oldest person on the staff at age 27 or 28. I think I was 20. Yeah, I was 27 when I first. At age 27, I was the 3rd oldest person on the staff. The oldest was 30. The majority of people there were in their early, maybe mid 20s.
Right.
So, and we're a bunch of suburban kids, mostly but not exclusively white suburban kids. So most of them did not have a background in magical theory, much less occult history. I did. So fortunately, Mage, the original Mage first edition didn't have a history for it. It just said the traitor Copernicus and the Technocracy, and so Magick is dead, and the traditions carried on. And part of that conversation with Ken was, okay, what do I do with this? And he's like, whatever you want. So that's when Brian, Kathy, Bill, Sam, and I hashed out a whole back history for this with Brian taking point on the Technocracy. And one of the things that we're talking about while we're trying to figure out how the fuck this group comes into existence in the first place, much less how they achieve all of this power, was why. Because again, method acting. What's your motive? Why is part of what I have a cat here. I have several cats here, actually. But part of when we're working on creating magical groups beyond the ones that were presented in the original book was every form of magic and every magical society is formed to meet a need. What is the need that the people who either pursue this form of magic or who create this magical society, what need are they meeting, and how do their culture and their resources and their place in society and their various obstacles, how do those things shape the way they approach magic and the way that they form their magical society? And we did that with the Technocracy. The more what we came up with was, look at this fucking world of darkness. It's crazy. You've got 9-foot-tall lycanthropic eco-killing machines. You've got undead demigods. You've got ghosts running around, animating shit and possessing people. And you've got, fairy things that are driving people insane. But in any case, this world is crazy. So the way that we looked at it was the Technocracy of the people who are trying to safeguard humanity. Even if you need to destroy the village in order to save it.
Right.
And so it went from science, bad, evil form of worm oppression to a catastrophe of good intentions.
Okay.
And that's what as we did the Technocracy books, we started, leaning further and further into who is in this organization. Why are they in this organization? How does this organization serve them, and how do they serve the organization? We have established that the organization does terrible things. Why does the organization do these terrible things? Right. Well, they do these terrible things because they got fucking vampires and were critters and crazy wizards throwing, blowing up neighborhoods and stuff like that. So of course they do these evil, oppressive things, and they are. This is one of the things that I emphasize, because sometimes people look at that take on the technocracy and they say you're glorifying fascism. No, I'm being realistic about human nature. Because, and I have an essay about this in the Book of Secrets. When you look at magic, when you look at magical societies, the aims of magical societies, especially from the 18th, 19th century onward, especially when you look at Europe and America, what you're looking at is organizations of control. And in this essay that I've got, Magick and the Fascist Urge, it's not just the technocracy that do this fascist thing. And I also critique the original setup for Mage the Ascension, which was these groups of reality, these groups of reality molders are trying to mold reality. And a thing that I began critiquing from the very first Mage source book that I worked on, Book of Chantries onward, was, what does that look like? It usually looks pretty fucked up. Because you can go, I am Gandalf, I am, I am reworking world. But as Gandalf recognizes in The Lord of the Rings, if you have that kind of power, you have to be careful with it. Right. And ultimately, Mage for me became an exploration for how people are frequently not careful with their power and should be more careful with their power, because otherwise you turn into this. Right. Whether this is a corrupt council, which is constantly self-destructing throughout the history of Mage, a corrupt technocracy, which is oppressive and tyrannical and genocidal, the literally insane metaphysical schizophrenics, the marauders, right. Or the deliberately, intentionally, cosmically malign Nefandi, who go, we're all damned, I'm just going to enjoy the ride.
Right, right. And I'm glad you brought them up, because of all the factions of Mage, all the 9 traditions have books. The Nefandi and the Technocracy have books, but the Nefandi were never covered as a faction until
until recently. Yeah,
they have the Book of the Fallen, and I picked that up actually. And you noted in there that was intentional, that yes. You never wanted to make them a playable character. Mm-hmm. Could you give us a little bit about why that is?
Oh yeah, because I've known people like that. They're fucking awful. As I mentioned, I have been involved with metaphysical groups, and I've had bad experiences with cults, and I've seen cults destroy people, and I've known people who did things like sacrifice animals to, conjure up whatever the fuck. I've known people who not literally blew their friends' brains out, but who metaphysically or psychologically blew their friends' brains out in a pursuit for power. We are surrounded right now in our real world reality war. We are surrounded by malign people who, whether or not they view what they're doing metaphysically, and because I've seen these people, because I've seen the results they get, I've seen people fuck themselves and the people around them up. And I said, way back in the beginning, I said, you can't turn 9 feet tall and turn into a 9 foot tall, were thing and rip people apart for Gaia. You can't become an undead super corpse. Maybe you can become a ghost, but I wouldn't recommend it, and you're not a fairy. People do practice magic. Whether or not those people's magic is affecting the world around them is something that people have been arguing about for millennia. But from a psychological standpoint, if nothing else, and from a physical and social effect, people who practice malign magic do malign things. And I never wanted to inspire, and I never do want to inspire people to be that. And when you are working in an interactive medium like role-playing games, you're not just telling a story. You can tell a story about a malign sorcerer, but as long as a person is watching that story, they may take it, completely fucking wrong and Fight Club the whole thing,
Right.
And think that they should be Tyler Durden, and miss the point. But if you're playing a role-playing game, you are saying, you are such and such. Ain't that cool?
Right.
And I said, I never wanted to make malign magic cool.
Right.
Because I've seen what it does to people.
Right. And I'll link that, I'll link to it, because it's interesting that the whole book is essentially, this is why these people are bad. It's not, it has no, this is how you be these people. It is, these people are.
Oh, how you be? I thought you said beat. Because it does have strategies for countering them. I'm sorry, but how you be these people. I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you said.
No, that's fine. No. But what it has concrete, I like to think it has concrete morality, where these people are the bad guys and this is why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's not telling you how to be them. It's not telling you how to, okay, well, this is how you do melfic magic, and this is how you do it. It doesn't do that. It says scum, 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 villainy, scum, scum, scum. And that's basically the book. These are not good people, and these are not people anyone should want to emulate.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very interesting that you decided to take that route.
Thank you. Yeah, it does, and I have gotten criticized for making a player's guide for Nefandi, and I'm like, it's not that. But again, bringing that method actor thing into it, I felt like it is more significant to present your antagonist from a knowing who your antagonist is, rather than just saying booga booga, bad, evil, because one, that's cartoonish, two, it's not realistic, and three, it's not interesting. I think it is much more interesting, definitely disturbing. Psychologically, I fucked myself up bad doing that book. Because not only did I open a lot of doors in my head and in my soul that I did not want to open and walk through, but I also show, in the course of the research, which, to avoid going into a whole thing about that, I write like an actor. I put myself into the role of whoever it is I'm writing about. And I had to put myself in that role. And I had just lost two of the most important people in my life when I was writing that book. And we were having the first of several, apparently, Trump ascensions.
Right.
And so I was in an extraordinarily dark place when I wrote that book. And it took me a while to get out of it. But I felt it was important. I felt it was vital, not even important. I felt it was vital to present the antagonist, the ultimate antagonist in a reality war, as one, they're only barely a metaphor for what's going on in the real world. The Nefandi obviously are fictional. The Bathies are fictional. The Iron Hearts, that's all fictional. But the people who do the shit they do are not fictional. The things they do are not fictional, and the damage they do to people is not fictional.
Right.
And I felt it was really important to show that, because it's easy, and they did this during the Revised Era, to just distance that cartoonish evil so much from reality that it becomes banal.
Yeah.
There was a bit of that in my original run on Mage to begin with. It was, there was this whole, the Nefandi were originally envisioned as crossover material for werewolf. These are the worm mages. This is literally what Mage First Edition says. They are the worm mages. And I was like, that's stupid. And just as Bill expanded on the worm from cosmic evil, Cthulhu, blah, 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 into a metaphor, barely concealed metaphor for late stage capitalism. And how we get right-wing World of Darkness fans, I have no fucking clue. Because we were about the furthest fucking thing from it. And we weren't exactly subtle. I mean, come on, Andrew did the Anarch's cookbook, for fuck's sake. Where does anybody get the idea that we wanted, that we felt Nazism was cool?
Right.
Anyway, that's a whole other rant.
Okay, so first off, screw those people.
Yeah.
But okay, so if I were going to play devil's advocate, I
Mhm.
would say groups like the Get of Fenris and Werewolf could potentially lead to that. And the reason why I say that is because they have a very Nordic background.
Yeah.
And people tend to glam onto stuff like that online. So
Uh-huh.
that's the only reason why I could see someone might want to do that. But you're right. There's nothing that, because they're alien to us. So you really shouldn't form that type of attachment to these characters because they're not like you and they really wouldn't like you anyway. So it's like, maybe you don't want to go hanging around with these people. You know?
Well, in the case of specifically the Nefandi, and for my view of, and again, numerous people have been line developers for Mage. I am not the one. I'm the person most associated with Mage simply because I've been involved with it since 1993, whether I wanted to be or not. But the different line developers have had a different take on it, and I don't want to speak for that. But in my particular case, I feel it's important for people to realize, especially you see this in the Book of the Fallen, for people to realize they could be like that.
Right.
Because I think recognizing your own potential for evil, your own potential for abuse is important, is vital, again, to use that word, is vital to recognizing how not to be that way. One of the things that I explored more in between my first run on Mage and my second run on Mage was shadow. I had heard of Jung's concept of the shadow at the first time I was working on Mage, and the Nefandi were, the Nefandi were intentionally, I think I even referred to them as the shadow of the traditions. But when I was involved with Francesca in particular, part of Francesca's practice is shadow work. And because I was going through a double divorce when Francesca and I met, a divorce from my wife and my divorce from what had something that had defined my life up until, shortly before that. I was deconstructing a lot of things in my own life and looking at my own potential for, my own potential for another big difference between Mage First Edition and Mage Second Edition, or Mage 20, rather my first run on Mage and my second run on Mage, is that in the 90s, we believed in trust your audience to know the difference. This is fiction. This is reality. Trust your audience to know the difference. And as we've seen in the intervening years, that's really not practical. People love to think that Tyler Durden and Scarface and Joker and so forth are role models. And when we were doing this stuff the first time around, it's like, oh, evil is relative. By the time you get Trump, evil's not relative. Evil's for real. And it's not, I personally do not believe in an external metaphysical evil, and I address this in the Book of the Fallen. I believe that evil is the human, evil is the shadow of the human heart.
Right.
We don't need devils. We don't need Cthulhu. We have the potential for ultimate evil inside of us. And it is part of our, I believe it's part of our sacred charge, to not be that person, because there are plenty of those people out there. So that's another reason why things shift from bad, evil technocracy, oh my God, in my first run on Mage, to the technocracy and the traditions both going, oh fuck, man, look at those guys. Right. Nah, let's team up.
Right.
We got to team up because otherwise they're going to wipe out the world.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So,
and you see that, and I've actually seen a few games that my friends and I have played or witnessed, and it typically ends up like that when either Nefandi or the Marauders show up. It is like, you're not so bad. Let's deal with this issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there a particular tradition that you're partial to as far as
Oh, I'm ecstatic.
right?
I mean, if you have to choose from the nine, because one of the other things too is that when I play Mage, I play someone who says fuck all your groups, because that's my actual real life my actual real life metaphysical path is fuck all y'all. I
Are
don't
you
trust
in the
any
game
of them.
right now? Are you in here right now? Do we have to talk about that? Uh, well, yeah, and I mean I'm the same way because I can't when I play. I can't. I'm the worst mage player because I can't stick to a particular tradition because I see something in each one that I resonate with, and like the celestial chorus. Even if you don't agree with their view on uh the one Christianity style magic, a lot of people would turn to them in real life because a lot of people turn to the church when there's something wrong.
Right?
So if any group is going to probably be the ones to show up when the horned beast shows up, it'll probably be these guys. So, but then I was thinking about your what you were explaining earlier about your background, and the verbena would be considered pagans, right? And
Yeah.
that's their whole thing. And a lot of the people that I grew up with who were into paganism and played mage, they all played verbena characters. Like, was that intentional to add that group?
Oh no. Well, those groups were there when I got hired. The 9 traditions plus the hollow ones and the 5 conventions of the Technocracy, the Nefandi and the Marauders were already established. I didn't create those.
Okay.
My design team and I recreated most of them from their original appearance. But I was not involved in creating those. What the groups I was involved in creating were the other, the crafts, the non-aligned, or what eventually became the disparate alliance.
Right.
Groups like the Nagoma, the Bata'a,
The children of knowledge.
yeah, and so, because one of the first things I said was, in my original appraisal of it was, this is a very white American perspective on everything, and we're Chinese mages. We're mages from India. We're mages from Africa. We're mages from from the actually indigenous practitioners, as opposed to the dream speakers who are also werewolf tie-ins, created as werewolf tie-ins. Where are alchemists? Where are Islamic mages? And so, with my design collaborators, we start hashing these things out. And I freely admit, one, these things would be considered a cultural appropriation, which was not even a term in the early 90s. But at that time, we worked with who we had. A mostly, though not entirely, white, creative, core, freelancers and people on staff, and the ability to go online and talk with people from a particular group or bounce something off of people from it didn't exist. Later, when we have social media, now you should, and I believe as a creator, you have a responsibility to check in with people from this particular group, whether that group is gender, ethnic, cultural, racial, religious, etc. You have a responsibility to do your fucking research,
Right.
and as much as possible involve people. In the early 90s, that wasn't possible.
Yeah.
And rather than not have, not addressing Voodoo, or not addressing Confucian ritual magic, not addressing Islam at all, we addressed it the way that we could, which was flawed. And we have spent the Mage 20 era fixing that as much as we can.
And I like that I like how Mage has evolved to anyone, because another bit of background, everybody. So when you become a mage, you awaken.
Yeah.
You're basically the best way that I can explain it is your spirit lights up and you become connected to a broader universe. And when anybody can do it.
Anybody.
It's not like a certain group of people or secret masters or anything thing like that. It's you could be walking down the street. Like, in fact, there was a story that I thought was excellent representation of this called the Crystal Messiah that was in the original run of Truth Until Paradox.
Yeah.
Where it was the 96 earthquake up in San Francisco. And this guy basically got thrown out of his bed and he woke up a mage. And it was like, what the hell happened, right? And it was just like that. It was just his mind and spirit just clicked and he became this other person. And I thought that was a very good representation of what it is that we're explaining here, because a lot of people, especially now that so much information is available, are getting hip to magic and hip to the occult and esoterica because there's no barriers anymore as far as access to information. And I equate it a lot to that. Like it's just like I study Thelema, but then I study ceremonial magic in and of itself. I study paganism. I study everything because it strikes my fancy. It's interesting. And whereas, like you were saying about the 90s, that wasn't possible.
You couldn't find it. Yeah. I mean, what you might find a few things in the New Age section of Barnes and Noble. Most of that stuff that you found in those books was garbage. And in order to find anything that resembled authentic, that's a whole other conversation, what is authentically, magical or authentic tradition. But in order to find anything that was, something more, something that had more depth than what some person, got paid 5 cents a word by Llewellyn to make up,
Right.
You had to know the right people, and I knew some of those people, but at the same time, we were doing basically a book or two a month. I didn't have time, to do in-depth research. None of us had time to do in-depth research in esoteric texts. So we were not, contrary to some people's, misconceptions, digging out. Now, I have a copy of the Lesser and Greater. I have copies of the Lesser and Greater Keys of Solomon. Yeah. But first of all, that's not my practice. And second of all, I wouldn't put that stuff aside from making brief allusions to it, I wouldn't put that stuff into a game anyway, because that's not the sort of thing. It's not the sort of thing you fuck around with without all of the proper discipline and the proper intentions and the proper background and the proper knowledge. These practices are not toys. And secondly, to favor one particular practice and say this is the way magic works would be to impose a reality on Mage that Mage's reality is counter to. In Mage, the idea is you are an agent of change. How you work that change, why you believe that change works, what practices you use in those things, that's up to the individual or maybe the society that individual belongs to. But it's not, aside from the admittedly 20th century chaos, 20th century chaos magic idea of reality is malleable and that you shape reality through intention, which is not necessarily true with other older or other traditional approaches to magic. But in any case, that's the one we went with. Right. But putting in, turning one of these books into a grimoire would be, one, I feel unethical, and two, it would be counter to the idea of Mage, which is universalist reality change, where, as you said, anybody can be a mage. Not you have to read the Lesser Key of Solomon and pursue this particular Solomonic path of ritual magic. Certainly isn't what I do in real life. Going back to your earlier question, I am an ecstatic bard. If you have to put me in a character class. And I don't do a lot of drugs. I've done enough psychoactives to know what it's like to open those doors. Thank you, Aldous. But I don't like the feeling of being intoxicated. So I don't I don't do drugs anymore. It's kind of one of those things. I did it as a tool to do this, to open this particular door, or to understand what this feeling is like, or to get this particular perception. I go, oh, okay, I've been there, done that.
Right.
Don't need to do it again. Don't want to do it again. My the closest things to real life metaphysical practices that I've done are dance, music, and hiking and sex. And doing those things with ritual intention, you appreciate things on a much deeper level than the people who just kind of, one of the biggest, and you find references to this in the Mage 20 Prelude, but one of the biggest metaphysical experiences of my life, as well as physical experience, was hiking the Appalachian Trail. Actually, hiking part of it. I didn't have a chance to hike the whole thing, but hiking part of the Appalachian Trail in 2006 with my friend Puka. And when you approach that as a sensory devotion, and we're both pagan, so appreciating that from the pagan standpoint, and also from the sensual standpoint, I did it barefoot because I wanted to feel where I was, and I wanted to feel in touch with the world. That you get a deeper experience of what that's like than someone who just straps on their boots, throws on a thing and speed hikes down the trail to see how fast they can do it.
Right. Yeah.
We would see people hiking like that, and we'd go, where's the fun in that?
Right.
I did the same. I've done the same thing, with ecstatic dance and with music, and I see my guitars and stuff back there. But those are those approaching life through art and working my intentions through art are what I do in real life.
Well, we're coming up on an hour, so I wanted to ask you one more question.
Sure.
Are there any games right now that you're playing that you'd recommend people take a look at?
I haven't, unfortunately, been doing much in the way of gaming because my wife and I are both high risk for COVID, and because COVID is still very much out there. I mean, one of her friends just got COVID, got diagnosed with COVID yesterday. And we know some people have died of it. I know a lot of people who've been disabled by it. People in our age group cannot afford to fuck around with it. So I'm pretty much entirely gaming online at this point, and that's almost all video games, because I've tried playing RPGs in a virtual tabletop thing. It just really doesn't click for me. And I've been doing some 5e. I enjoy that, but it's not really my style. I like it better than other editions of Dungeons and Dragons, but it's too tactical for me. I would love to play more Monster Hearts. I would love to play Bluebeard's Bride. That Monster Hearts and Bluebeard's Bride are, to me, kind of the exemplars of new generation gaming, and the kind of, I'm still interested in RPGs, obviously. I just haven't gotten to play them much.
Right.
I am designing some new stuff. I have to finish a massive client job first, but for the most part, almost all the games that I've been doing are video games. That being said, again, I'm a huge advocate for the Powered by the Apocalypse system, which is much more the way I like to game than the Storyteller system, much less 5e. And I personally find Bluebeard's Bride to be a fucking masterpiece, but it's one of those games you have to play with only the right people. Monster Hearts, I love it, but kind of play it with only the right people. And I enjoy Fate, but again, you got to play it with the right people. I think more than anything else, I love what is going on. I love the state of the art in role-playing games at this point, because back when we were doing this stuff, you had to go through offset printing, you had to go through the distribution chain, you had to go through hobby trade, you had to sell X number thousand copies in order to break even. You could only reach the people who went into a gaming store or a hobby store where your stuff was carried. And so even as imaginative as we tried to be, and sometimes succeeded in being back in the day, there was so much you couldn't do. Now, thanks to PDFs, POD, drive-through RPG, and the virtual tabletop programs, itch, and so forth, anybody who has an idea can turn it into a game, get it to a global audience, and spend almost nothing in the process. Or through crowdfunding, you can raise tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars to get this particular game out there. And because those tools are there is a broader, wider, richer pool of creators and a vastly larger audience and a great deal more possibility than we ever had imagined back in the 80s and 90s. So I love that, even though I am personally not playing any of the new games. I buy a bunch of them. I back a bunch of them because I just love seeing what's out there. That's fucking cool.
I still see the influence of Mage whenever I play a game, especially one with about technology, kind of Magick style. Like every time I play Cyberpunk, I'm like, okay, I'm a member of the Technocracy, and we're going through Night City, and this is what we're doing. And I do have to again say how much I appreciate the work you and the team have done over all these years. I going back to 1993 when I used to drag my dad down to Third Planet, and every weekend picking up a new book. I at once upon a time I had all of the tradition books, all the Technocracy books, everything, all lined up, color coordinated. But now, relationship reasons, I am now on PDFs. So, but I just have to say how much I want to thank you for the work you've done over the years, and I really appreciate it. And if you talk to the team, please give them my best.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you very much. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for the interview. Thank you for being you and doing this program. And thank you for getting it. Because one of the things that we said when we were brainstorming up, what do we do with this thing, that both Stuart and I agreed that Mage was very much a game for the people who got it. And most people wouldn't. Most people, the reaction to Mage was, what the fuck is this? Part of my job was to make it more accessible, and I think I did. But even then, it's still a whole lot of people, it's like, what the fuck is this? Thank you for being one of the people who gets it, because you're the big, you and fans like you are the reason that I'm still doing this. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I appreciate you.
Casting circles beneath the midnight sky, incantations beneath the shadows fly, summoning secrets, embracing the darkness.